So before we start the event, I just have a few housekeeping announcements for you today. So following the first presentations, we'll have a short break starting at about 11:10. You should also see a Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So please use that to submit your questions to our presenters today. And we'll try to answer them, but also during the designated Q&A session led by Ross Singleton, the UK5G Advisory Board Chair. And after the main event, we'll move to the meeting module, which is our platform we're using today for the networking. And the networking should last from about 12:30 till 3 p.m. And I think this is it from my housekeeping announcements. I'm going to hand over now to Graham Malley, who's the co-chair of the LEPs and SMEs working group, who's going to open the session and introduce our panelists today. Graham, over to you.
Thank you, Ivona. So firstly, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to you all for joining this 5G Rural webinar. It's delivered by the UK5G LEPs and MES working group and sponsored by UK5G, the National Advisory Board for UK National 5G Support. This is our second focus workshop exploring the opportunities for 5G, this time focused on the rural and extra-urban communities. Our previous workshop was focused on manufacturing and SMEs. As I've already said, I'm Graham Malley and I'm the co-chair of this working group. So we're all aware of digital technologies and how they've revolutionised all aspects of our lives and have proven to be a catalyst to improve our economy. And 5G is seen as a game changer, facilitating the realisation of many of these new technologies that people often discuss, such as artificial intelligence and augmented reality, which will enable the rethinking of services and business models. However, at a fundamental level, the COVID-19 crisis has underlined as never before the importance of the need for high quality digital connectivity in all aspects of our business and personal life. And as we're all aware, the rural and extra-urban areas have struggled to obtain even basic levels of connectivity, but this is changing, and 5G offers far greater flexibility on what can be done on a local and regional basis, even by using existing 4G networks as the foundation. And you might be aware the UK has recently gained commitment from our 4 national network operators to improve the national coverage by about 98% by 2024. And although this is based around 4G, we would expect this to support 5G access. And the purpose of today is to provide an awareness of the ongoing activities and the potential opportunities afforded by 5G and how you might get involved. We have some of the UK's leading 5G experts who will give you a non-technical description of 5G in the context of rural and urban deployment, and several case studies on rural 5G already underway. After the webinar, as Ivona said, you'll be able to have time for one-to-one discussions with speakers and other experts to talk further about the presentation and ongoing activities. But firstly, I'd take the pleasure to introduce you to Ian Smith. So Ian's the Programme Director of 5G Testbeds and Trials at DCMS, and Ian's going to set the scene of the 5G landscape for us. Over to you, Ian.
Thanks, Graham. Delighted to be speaking to all of these in these strange times or video conferencing events. I think it's testament to the innovation technology that we've been able to keep connected in these difficult times. There's been huge increases in capacity requirements on the networks, and it's really pleasing to see that despite all of this, the UK networks have coped to the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic. This year, the 5G testbed and trials program has been working at great pace, even during the pandemic, to deliver a range of new innovative projects across the UK. But for those of you who are not familiar with the program, let's just take a minute to reflect on how we got here. In autumn 2017, the UK government committed 200 million to create the 5G testbed and trials program, which was essentially a decision to put the UK at the forefront of developing 5G technologies, services and applications. The programme is set up with a clear vision to foster, build and lead. We want to foster the development of the 5G ecosystem. We want to help build the business case for 5G, thinking about possibilities well beyond mobile connectivity. And finally, we want to lead the research and development in this area to showcase the solutions that UK companies, research centres and innovators have come up with to tackle some of the challenges that we all are experiencing. As the Programme Director of the 5G Testbed and Trials Programme, I get to set up trials with technology that I know and love. I've been in the mobile network industry for about 25 years, but this opportunity to work with not just the operators and vendors, but also industry experts, world-leading research institutions to create the 5G testbeds is quite a challenging, but an extremely rewarding experience. We've launched several new trials this year, including 2 new manufacturing-focused projects led by Forward and Zeta networks. These projects will investigate the challenges and benefits associated with using private 5G networks to improve the manufacturing of electric cars by increasing productivity and increasing the effectiveness of composite design manufacture. Not to mention the programme's latest competition currently underway, 5G Create, which will be awarding up to 30 million as an open competition which is designed to encourage innovative bids from all sectors and industries. But moving on to our focus on rural, as you know, delivering rural connectivity is difficult, expensive, but also very important for this government, and we are keen to solve this problem. There are 3 initiatives that are kind of interrelated around this: the Rural Gigabit Connectivity Scheme, the Shared Rural Network, which Graham just touched upon, and these 2 complement the 5G Testbed and Trials Programme's Rural Connect Communities projects. The Rural Gigabit Connectivity Initiative has committed 5 million to subsidise the rollout of gigabit-capable broadband in the hardest to reach 20% of the UK through an outside-in approach. Graham's mentioned the Shared Rural Network, which is a 500 million matched by the mobile operators to increase 4G coverage across the UK landmass. And finally, the programme that I run, the Rural Connected Communities project, is funding 7 5G R&D projects in rural areas across the UK, and will invest 30 million over 2 years. This is not to mention our 2 previous use cases, which was trials in Rural First, which I think you may be hearing a bit about later, and 5G RIT, which have led the way for the programme and the R&D in the rural space. We are keen to ensure that we focus on testing different technical and commercial models for 5G. Current hype around 5G is pervasive in the industry, with almost daily announcements being made either for a new testbed commitment or advocating the potential benefits of vertical industries. There is also the reality that many operators are facing challenging times with static or declining revenue. While some see 5G as being able to drive revenue, others are concerned about the economics of site densification. Indeed, adding new sites is a key strategy to increase wireless capability, but the current deployment model is prohibitively expensive. Hence, for effective 5G rollout to take place, there needs to be a major cost model change. This point cannot be pushed hard enough. The government's commitment to ensuring productivity for all not only lies in trialling new use cases from high-speed networks, but also accelerating deployment of fixed broadband infrastructure, busting planning and regulatory barriers, and working with operators and vendors to drive costs down, all of which will help innovation in the rural areas and support the brilliant work that has already been done to connect our rural communities. Looking forward to discussing this with you all, and I hand back to Graham now, and thank you very much for attending.
Many thanks, Ian. So our next speakers, Peter and Adrian, are going to take you through an overview of a non-technical overview of the roadmap for 5G technology.
Graham, thank you, and good morning to everyone. I'm well pleased to be joined by Adrian Brain as well. We're going to split the presentation into sort of two parts and have a summary at the end. And please join us during the Q&A session if there are things that we've rushed through. But this is basically a very fast overview of current part of 5G, where we're at here in the UK, some stuff that's happening in Europe and also US and Asia. So that's what we're going to run through. We are going to touch a quick bit on the timeline for everything that's going to be happening over the next 5 years, and I think that's critical that everyone does focus on that. I'm going to skip my bio because you can find that out afterwards. So what is 5G? We've had a lot of hype. The hype thankfully died down in 2009, and now we have the reality of actually building out 5G. But I think there's still one part that's very, very true to what we want to achieve here, and this is the 5G vision. What is 5G all about? And it's really the potential, I won't say the ability, but the potential at this point in time to actually use the technology all the amazing things that have been built into this technology and will continue to be built in the technology for the next 3 or 4 years that enable us to do some more things, do some more clever things, do things quicker, faster, and hopefully along the way, we get some real benefits out of it. And it's the benefits part which is important. So the benefits in terms of reducing the amount of congestion on roads, reducing the amount of CO2 pollution adjacent to residential areas, having better connected buildings that are able to actually more efficiently manage themselves, increased productivity in manufacturing, and so on and so on. So this vision still exists. Everyone is still hooked up on this vision. It will not all be there day one. It will take some time. If you look on the left-hand side of the screen there, it sort of says, delivering fiber-like performance without the wires. I think that was an early day anchor, and it is still there today. And if you compare what's happening in Europe and in the US, for 5G, the focus has really been about the consumer day one, about getting gigabits, literally gigabits of performance out to everyone on the street. It won't be there immediately, it won't be there everywhere, but for them, actually stopping that hourglass on the phone was very, very important indeed. Why? Because the 4G networks are getting very congested. In Europe, there's a different focus. We're much more focused on the efficiency of 5G, how 5G can actually help reduce the cost of deploying networks, how we can make these networks more efficient, but at the same time, adding in new capabilities. So as we move along, we're not going to touch too much on this, but on the left-hand side, 3 basic features: enhanced mobile broadband, massive IoT, critical communication. The enhanced mobile broadband is there today. That's the gigabits a second. The massive IoT and the critical communication will arrive over the next 2 years. We're currently, for all those in the know, we're currently at a software release that gives us the broadband part. The 2 other features, plus some very clever things in the middle, will arrive over the next 2 years. I think the bottom right there is a much more interesting picture, because it shows how we can add bits into a typical town in terms of connected vehicles, additional automation in industry, better connectivity into offices, etc., e-health programs, 3D video, 3D AR, VR, and other aspects of that. But that is still part of this dream, and we really need to understand, is that just it? And the answer is no, it's not. So I was very fortunate 2 years back to spend a fair amount of time working with the Digital Catapult on their 5G commercial strategy and value proposition, which meant going into a deep dive with some of the big market research companies. We ended up with about 240 use cases that came down to 24. And of those 24 use cases, there was about 8 or 10 with a high technology relevance to what we want to do in our lives today. So if you look at the bottom right picture there, social personal services, retail, transportation, finance, ICT, manufacturing, utilities, professional services, and then there's a bunch of others. And the interesting ones there are manufacturing, ICT, and the social personal services. I mean, those from that specific view work quite well. And on the left-hand side, you can look at it from a completely different perspective, which is industry. So industry 4.0. So you have the oil industry, the gas industry, distribution, shipping, transportation, manufacturing, hospitals, power generation, process manufacturing, etc., etc. All of those are great users of technology. All of those can be enhanced and be made more productive by taking elements of the 5G ecosystem and deploying them today and also out into the future. But that's a lot. So where do we really want to focus in? And what I want to do is draw your attention to the bottom left of the screen here. So this is a work that was done with Ericsson and Arthur D. Little and a whole bunch of others helped input into this discussion. It has been updated since then, but I think this is an interesting one. So this looked at 2016 through 2026, 5G enabled industry digitalization revenues for ICT players. In other words, the service providers, the systems integrators delivering ICT. And they added it all up, came up, nice big number, 1.3 trillion in terms of revenues there. But what was more interesting is the split. Energy 20%, manufacturing 19%, public safety 13%, healthcare 13%, etc., etc., etc. And within that, you'll say, like, where is rural? But rural is in all of those. I mean, all of those things can happen in a rural area. So it is actually quite interesting to say, okay, industry just doesn't happen next to a big city. Industry can happen all over the place. And there are some amazing examples of industry being out in very remote rural areas, i.e. mining, for instance, is a great one there. And mining is benefiting greatly from 4G today and 5G in the future in different aspects. The other thing to look at here is the right-hand side of this picture. The two green bars show what would have happened if potentially we didn't have 5G. So the growth in operator revenues, about 1.5%. With the availability of 5G, and this is where you have to sort of believe the numbers here, we moved to a growth of 13.3%. So the guys at AD Little think that is a solid set of numbers. There have been 3 other sets of numbers in a similar vein, whether they're copying the same stats or whether they're actually coming to the same conclusions. We'll leave that for an academic exercise. But what it does indicate is that there is an enormous opportunity from the service provider sector to actually engage with each of those industry or vertical sectors and actually figure out how can we help, how can we get involved, and how can we do different things here. So really what this all comes up to then is a picture. Right? This is a picture. Again, this is using numbers from IHS Markit, etc., etc., and commissioned by Qualcomm, obviously one of the big silicon providers. But they looked at this from a slightly different perspective. They took the smarter agriculture, the healthcare, the transportation, the manufacturing, energy and utilities, public safety, smart cities and infrastructure, smart inventory, logistics, and came out with an enormous great number of 12 trillion. I mean, that's like 10 times the size of the previous set of numbers, but again, over a much longer period of time. And I think what is important here again is that with all the hype, at the same time, for as far as the industry is concerned, the industry knows that the consumer aspect of 5G is going to be one small part. Now, we're not going to spend huge sums of money more on our 5G tariff, monthly tariff, than we would on a 4G one. We'll expect to get more, but we expect to pay the same at the same time. So for the mobile operators to make these significant investments into 5G, they're going to want to branch out in different areas. Some mobile operators will stay on the consumer side, some will engage with systems integrators, others will actually invest internally, and they'll put in place all the sales and marketing and all the expertise and the delivery teams and so on, such they can go into some of these specific sectors. And you can see that already happening here in the UK with Vodafone, for instance, also with part of BTEE. At the moment, 3, for instance, is focusing definitely on the consumer sector. It will change over time. O2 is doing a lot of different work at the moment. It has an integration program with its new parent to actually work through, but we'll see what happens there. Back to the use cases. So how do the use cases fit with this wonderful new technology? So on the left-hand side here, we've mapped out mobile broadband, massive communication, low latency services, and here being mapped against human to human, human to machine, machine to machine, and then slotted in some of those specific use cases. So you can see how a mixture of different technologies, on the left-hand side, fit into some of the applications across the top there in terms of humans and machines, and then how those specific things in. And that's not just industrial automation won't just exist in the machine to machine bit. There are elements of industrial automation where you'll have human to machine, because you'll have operatives with AR glasses on walking around factories. Those glasses will enable to stop them walking into robots that are actually take priority over humans, etc., etc. So there is a lot of interaction between those two aspects, but it just gives you a good idea in some respects as to what is going on. I'm not going to touch on the use cases. I put up 2 or 3 here that I used on a previous 5G Scotland presentation on manufacturing, but just to give you a couple of examples. Worcester Bosch, you may have already heard of. Lufthansa is an interesting one. For Lufthansa, this is about aircraft maintenance. So they have one or two super experts that if you have the problem with an aircraft or a problem with an engine, they need to get the expert to the plane quickly to figure out whether they take the plane offline and then it goes off into scheduled maintenance or unscheduled maintenance. The cost of getting the expert to the plane is high. The timing is too long. So what Lufthansa did was build a portable 5G network that they can take to the aircraft, enable that network to then connect back to the expert who could be hundreds or thousands of miles away. So the expert can actually go into the aircraft, he can take a look in, he or she can take a look inside, they can put HD cams inside the engines and so on. Do that quick diagnosis with all the information that's come from the telemetry from the aircraft and figure out what to do with that in terms of the maintenance schedule. But I'll leave it to that one because we've got some more case studies to come back to. Just quickly on the timeline aspect, where are we today? We are towards the end of 2020. So you can see the black dotted line there. So we sit on the left-hand diagram, we sit at the early part of initial deployment. Yes, 5G's been around for quite a while, but it's been trial stages, pre-commercial trials. We're now in that initial deployment. So we're seeing 50, 100 cities lit up, but we're not seeing all of the transport corridors. We're not seeing all the rural areas, etc. So there is still a way to go. The other part to this is also the software that is used within 5G networks. So today we have release 15. Some of the clever things I mentioned won't happen over the next 2 years. Why? Because we need release 16 and ultimately we will need release 17, which commercially will be available towards the end of 21, beginning of 22. But by the time you've deployed it into the network, it will be 2023 for it to be fully available across a commercial 5G network. Now, one thing to understand, this is all based on the current 5G builds. So there are 5G private networks that are now being built, e.g. the Lufthansa one, which are not connected to the outside world. They can actually take advantage of not needing this initial deployment. They can go into that, we're going to be deployed stage straight away. So they can actually take the features they need. They can even take a custom version of 5G as long as it sits within the standards or what the standards may become, and then deploy. So if you look at some of the factory applications that are being explored in Germany at the moment with BMW and Audi and so on, so they're building out a private 5G network, but they're doing this on the basis that they know what will come along, they know the feature sets they need, they do not need to connect to the outside world. They may or may not be built by a mobile operator. They may be built independently by one of the big vendors and so on. But anyway, so that's the timeline that the whole of Europe is working against and will continue to work against. Likewise in the US, likewise out in Asia. The three regions are in slightly different lockstep. So Asia is way out in advance. And in fact, there's some great stuff coming out of Korea at the moment in terms of their national program and some specific things I think we ought to take a look at in terms of doing 5G in rural. They now have a national working party to cover the whole of the rural part of South Korea with 5G. The US is really much number two. They needed it because their 4G networks were creaking. Europe is number three. Why? Because we're still only 2/3 the way through building out our 4G network. So over the next 2, maybe 4 years, even possibly 5 years, we'll continue to invest in 4G. And as Ian mentioned earlier, we have this program with the shared rural network to increase geographic coverage for 4G. Likewise, 5G will get built alongside that, but it will be over a 5-year period of time. For those who have not seen one ever, a couple of pictures of what 5G might look like on a rooftop. Very few of this are getting to the towers at the moment. The big oblong antenna is a 4G, 5G one, multi-ported as they call it. That enables both 4G and 5G within the same antenna. The square antenna you can see on the 3 rooftops there, that is a 5G, what's called a massive MIMO antenna, basically multiple antenna elements, either 32 by 32, 64 by 64, which allows for multiple beams to be created and enhances and focuses the bandwidth and capacity that's there onto where the user is, whether the user at street level or in adjacent offices. Crazy piece of technology. It's taken a while to put together, but it does work extremely efficiently. So just before I hand over to Adrian, I just wanted to run through quickly on a couple of things on 5G rural requirements. So I am working with one of the other regions on rural 5G. I've also been working with Facebook and their connectivity program in the US on 5G rural and also 4G rural. So from a rural requirements perspective, three things I think that are useful. One is broad effective coverage, capacity where it's needed, in other words, using things like fixed wireless broadband, a cost base relative to the added social and economic value, and not just the number of users. So there's no point just counting 100 users and just deciding, right, we'll have a tower here. The cost base for actually building out the network needs to be related to the social and economic value. In other words, can we deliver up connected health? Can we deliver up enhanced public safety? Can we actually connect up schools? Can we connect up children when they're doing their homework in the evenings and the weekends, etc.? So somebody somewhere needs to figure out all of that social economic value, back calculate that, and then challenge industry to actually do rural at a much lower cost. So areas to explore, access to new spectrum, that will happen in January next year with the next auction. There are some technology aspects here. Ian mentioned about the DCMS SRM program. I think there's an option there to actually focus on how to build lower cost towers out in the rural area, leveraging the fiber build out that's been done by a lot of companies across the whole of the UK at the moment, leveraging what DCMS is doing with schools and health centres in terms of fibre backhaul and making that available for 5G, funding rural mobility CSPs to actually build out their own local patch, and then use the capability for the mobile operators layered on top of that to deliver 5G, something that's happened in the US for donkey's years. And then a real focus on the use cases. So not just broadband, there's agri-tech, health, surveillance, environment, etc. So yeah, so that's enough for me. I will pass over to Adrian. Adrian, for you.
Thanks, Peter. So I'm going to have a quick look at applications. My name's Adrian Brain. We run a business accelerator for startups and SMEs that operate in the 5G space. If you'd like to go to the next slide, Peter, please.
Oops, wrong way. There you go.
Okay, so we're just going to cover now some of the applications areas that may be relevant to rural. So the first one is about energy management. So we're all quite used, I think, already to building management and smart metering. A lot of us have got smart metering in our homes. One of the key things, though, that is going to need to be managed in the future is the smart grid. So as we get more diverse methods of generating energy, such as wind and solar and so forth, they tend to be more remote. So they're in areas where it's windy, or they're in areas where it's sunny. And it's not always windy and it's not always sunny. And so managing when we can bring energy online or offline is really a key thing. And whereas at the moment we're faced with perhaps just a few big power stations distributed around the country, we could potentially have thousands of sources of energy in the future. And all of that needs to be managed from a central point. Also, environmental management. Of course, you know, going forward, we want to use energy sources that are environmentally friendly, and so managing that as well to make sure that we're using those sources of energy when they're available is going to be a key thing. And in agri-tech and farming, you know, we're looking there also at management of energy around those things as well. Next slide, please, Peter. Next slide, please, Peter. Okay, healthcare. So again, in a rural setting, we may not be particularly close to healthcare professionals. And so managing those kind of things it is really something that 5G can help with. So when we're looking at personalized care, for example, so this is social care we're really talking about here. Being able to contact people when you're in a remote location and to be able to receive your care when you're in a remote location is problematic at the moment. Probably most people, they're using just a regular landline telephone. Again, telemedicine becomes possible using 5G. So we can open up access to healthcare professionals through that network. I'm sure a lot of people already are experiencing this to some extent during the pandemic, that many doctors' surgeries are not taking face-to-face appointments, but are doing that by telephone. That's okay, but it's just audio. You know, what 5G is going to enable actually is a video connection to that as well. So you'll be able to see the doctor will be able to see you. You know, you're not going to be in a situation where the doctor says, can you take a picture of that and send it to me? They'll be able to see it instantly. And precision medicine is an area where we're designing drugs and treatments specifically for an individual. And so again, that's something that 5G will enable. Next slide, please, Peter. Media and entertainment. You know, I'm sure everybody's heard from people that live in remote communities that are complaining about the broadband speed that they can get. 5G is really going to enable us to deliver ultra fidelity media to remote locations. Also event experiences. So if we're talking about perhaps music festivals, to be able to deliver high fidelity media experience there, maybe you know, you're interested in a band that's on another stage and you can't possibly get over to that stage in time to see them on. You could experience that wherever you are within that event. And providing feedback and user-generated content, you know, so that you can talk to other people that are at the event and give your views about what you think, upload pictures and so forth. Virtual and augmented reality is, you know, again for tourism type applications, we can augment what people are seeing, or we can create virtual experiences around what they're seeing, so that they can learn about what they see around them. Next one, Peter. Automotive. So this is, you know, we've all heard about autonomous vehicles, but you know, also in rural applications, we can have autonomous farm machinery, for example. So you could have combine harvesters that would drive themselves to the field and drive themselves around the field doing the harvesting. And that allows for cooperation between different farmers where they can share those kind of resources. Cooperative traffic management will enable us to better optimize use of rural roads, avoiding congestion points. And the digitalization of transport and logistics will enable us to, in these days where we're getting more and more stuff delivered directly to our homes, give us that capability to manage that much more better and much more efficiently. Next one, please, Peter. So one of the big things around 5G is it gives us improved productivity in a number of these applications. But there are a number of factors in that. It gives us access to, in the cloud, high-speed compute capability. It gives us access to data so that we can do better analysis and better measurement. It gives us much more performance and that capability to do visualization.
Okay,
next one, Peter.
I think that's it. And Adrian,
Okay.
sort of truncated down, hopefully. I think we're still 5 minutes over, but apologies there.
Okay.
I'm going to skip through this one because Ian gave a wonderful cover of everything that DCMS has been doing and continues to do to support 5G. So I'm just going to leave you and say thank you to Adrian for running through on the application side. Thank you for everyone for listening on 5G. The slides will be made available, but I think on the summary here, I just sort of asked a bunch of questions for everyone to think about before they sort of go down this 5G route. In other words, where does the value reside? What use cases do you find compelling? Who are you going to build the partnerships with? And how do you determine what those use cases are and how do you monetize them? What are the challenges in capturing value from 5G and how you're going to address them? What type of 5G business model do you look at? Do you use a mobile operator? Do you build your own private network? Do you use some combinations in between? And which industry sectors and use cases to, etc., focus on? So a lot of things to think about, but hopefully you'll get there. And in terms of 5G itself, just to actually prove that it does work, top left-hand picture, that was 634 megabits on the EE network. That was actually indoors at a conference center in Earls Court. So it does work and it can actually deliver some outstanding performance. And I know the guys at 3 in outside their offices in Reading and Maidenhead, they've achieved about 1.8 gigabits there. But thank you very much, everyone. And I'll hand over to the next presenter.
Many thanks, Peter and Adrian. Fascinating.
Sorry for being 5 minutes over.
Okay, sorry. Fascinating overview, both the showing the opportunity and how it can impact on every part of our life. I'd just like to now hand to Bob Stewart, who will take us through the first case study. He's going to talk us through 5G New Thinking project. Over to you, Bob.
Thank you, Graham. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, and is my screen sharing now?
Could you just go on full mode if you could?
I'm sharing again.
It's not in presentation.
Okay, is that okay?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, thank you. So thank you to colleagues for the presentation. So in this short presentation, I want to introduce you to the project we titled 5G New Thinking. And the project's going to run over 2020 to 2022. And it's part of the DCMS 5G testbeds and trials. And we're here, or we exist to empower rural and poorly connected communities to seize the opportunities of 5G technologies and new business models. So we heard from previous colleagues about how 5G might enable in rural areas students and school pupils to do homework, or something as exotic and large as a massive MIMO for a car manufacturing plant. So there's quite some diversity in where the next generation is looking to bring solution. Sometimes we talk about the different 5Gs that we perceive. We meet lots of communities, lots of vendors, lots of folks with a stake in the future business. And we've kind of come to the conclusion that there's kind of 3 different groupings depending on who we're speaking to. And there's the top one of consumer 5G. And the consumer is now seeing a push from mobile network operators for new 5G phones, which are faster and better. And obviously there's an element of customer loyalty in those business models. And that's 5G to many folks. It's a new phone, it's an upgrade. And the second block, we have engineering and technology. So to the engineers and the network designers, it's all about standards, it's about new radio, it's about waveforms, it's about massive MIMO, millimeter wave, ORAN, Open RAN, and so on. And then down at the bottom, in the many diverse places where we're trying to bring connectivity, it's just what's coming next. It's wireless everything and everywhere. It's new partnerships, it's sharing of resources, it's neutral hosting, it's new massive or rural deployments. And those business models and operating models, again, are something that we, in common with other projects, are definitely looking at to see what we can do to accelerate the pace. And what's been driving us for many years in our consortium is shared spectrum. And shared spectrum has arrived in many different ways. We have licensed spectrum that we've had for some long time. We have shared spectrum, which is now here in the US, the UK, and we have, of course, license exempt, and Wi-Fi and other bands have been very successful there. The revolution, that's Ofcom's words from 2019. It's been around since July 2019, when they opened up the airwaves to support this wireless revolution. So the shared and local licenses that we can now access for connectivity in any area, but of course, rural is a specific opportunity, given in some places there is not quite the connectivity and not always the business model to drive that connectivity. Hence, we need intervention to help. Our journey with some key partners started in the top left in 2001 in shared spectrum. And then we did a number going top to bottom. We did a number of networks in Tyree, then in Glasgow, a pilot using shared spectrum in what was the kind of first mode in the UK of TV white space. We did some demonstration in Africa with Microsoft. We did a project on the Orkney Islands with key partners, the council and an organization, CloudNet. We did some trials at sea, again, all shared spectrum. And in the top right, we then commenced 5G Rural First project. And in Scotland, looking forward to a strategy for the country, and particularly given some of our rural issues, the Scottish Government formed the Scotland 5G Centre. And now, 2020-22, that's the 5G New Thinking project. So Isle of Bute was back in 2011. That was our first experience working with excellent partners, BT and BBC. And part of that experience was using shared spectrum, but also about getting access to hardware, getting access to radios. So the Nokia, the Ericsson, or other vendors, that wasn't available to us. It wasn't in these spectrum bands. And that was quite the experience as to how do we build a network? Where can we get access to RAN, radio access network hardware? In 2015, we did a shared spectrum nomadic because we were putting connectivity on the ferries around Orkney, so supported by Scottish Government with key partners CloudNet. We worked with some tier 2 vendors, Six Harmonics and others, to give us access to hardware and radios. 2014, again, using Adaptrum radios and Six Harmonics, we did some demonstration of the shared spectrum opportunity for communities to build their own networks in Kenya. And then our 5G Rural First project, that came along in 2018. It was an excellent project, fantastic learning. And it was a DCMS test beds and trials project. It was led by Cisco, and it was focused on the Orkney Islands. And we wanted to demonstrate that we could build a mobile network. We could build elements of fixed wireless access, and we could demonstrate a number of use cases. And what was 5G about it? Well, it was 5G because we were using the latest release of radios. We're moving release 14, pushing towards 15, and that therefore, connecting to the core that we had with Cisco, made this a state-of-the-art network. And it was real. We built a number of radios. We worked at 3.5, we worked at 700 megahertz, and with key partners on Orkney, we built our network in what they call the mainland there. There's a total of 70 islands. And the demonstration was, yes, we can build something. And moving that forward, we're now at the 5G New Thinking project. In Scotland, again, we have a particular geography here. We do have a lot of rural areas. We do have connectivity problems in broadband and mobile. So something that's again given us great momentum is the Scottish Government setting up the Scotland 5G Centre. So that was driven from a number of projects, Rural First included, that made us realise that we can help with the growth of the industry by helping mobile network operators, by helping to manage interventions, by helping communities to engage. And the key things that we need, the network elements of partnerships, RAN and backhaul, we need shared spectrum, we need cloud and core, we need enterprise and industry. And the key ingredient for us on the right-hand side is community and civic engagement. If we want to build these private or neutral hosted networks, we have to have the community involved. We have to have the councils or the civic authorities involved. So again, 5G New Thinking project. So we're a cooperative of diverse partners, diverse meaning engineering, software, finance, different use cases. So we're developing the tools, the processes, and the business models that we want to help empower rural and poorly connected communities to rapidly establish next generation and 5G connectivity for local benefit. So that can be in partnership with network operators, that could be private networks. The key partners, Cisco, the lead partner, and my university, Strathclyde, is the principal partner. And we have a number of partners supporting us in shared spectrum. The Scotland integration piece is run by the 5G Centre. We work with SHIFA, or Faroese Telecom, as a GSMA mobile network operator. BBC on the Orkney Islands, CloudNet are the lead partner in terms of driving, running, building the networks. We have a finance partner because this has to be sustainable. You have to come up with a business model that is affordable, because that's the reason that we don't have rollout. And building UNR technologies and getting access to tier 2 hardware, building partnerships with tier 2 providers, and then setting up vehicles like Bencoms or cooperatives that could run a network. And then the location and council partners in the lower left are very important. We're not going to roll out to all of these regions, but we want the learning, the understanding, the problems, the concerns to feed into the new thinking so that we can share our ideas at the end of the project. And then a number of use cases. As we build and create, we'll be working with a number of use case and technology partners. SME partnerships. So this is the kind of LEP and SME working group that we're doing the webinar for today. And that's something that's been very important to all of the work we've done, working with local partners, local tech partners, local use case partners, local engagement partners. And invariably they will be SMEs. So for our local build and network operation in Orkney, CloudNet are the lead. We work with SHIFA, who've got fibre access. We work with Bogons, who are building networks in parts of Scotland. For the finance, we work with Pure Leapfrog, again, a finance social enterprise company. We've set up a Bencom. Our location partners in Northern Ireland and the borders of Scotland and England, and Scotland, and then representing the Highlands and Islands, the Orkney Islands Council. We're working with these organizations to bring us the ideas, the concerns, and help us interpret their understanding of what we could do for them. And then very importantly, RAN suppliers. We've learned over 10 years in our projects, although we work with tier 1s like Cisco, for things like the RAN, the radio access network, we hear lots of things about who will supply and some of the politics around that and some of the cost points. So we have built relationships with tier 2 suppliers, and we have released 16. We will be evolving to release 17. And those supplier partnerships or associate partnerships have been very important to us. And then locally, in the first networks we'll design in Scotland, again, working with local companies for fibre backhaul, for network management, for connectivity. So Scottish Wireless, Ping, Commons World are companies that we're now engaging with via 5G New Thinking and our Scotland 5G projects. So it's a shared spectrum rural network where we're in rural areas. We're not deploying over this whole area, but this is the area where we're bringing the different unique problems. Northern Ireland, the borders of Scotland and England, mainland and largely the Highlands of Scotland and the islands. We've partners from all of these areas engaging and telling us what some of the issues are. And what do we want to do? Well, we want to design and build private networks, mobile access, fixed wireless access. We want to show the economic benefits. We want to explore and test the viability of the Ofcom shared and local licensing opportunities. It's here now, spectrum is available. We want to show, particularly with partner Federated Wireless, dynamic spectrum is part of the solution, part of the acceleration of building new networks. We want to show that we can finance this, public finance or even intervention, linkage, and private finance. It has to pay for itself. We want to build these relationships with MNOs. The mobile network in the UK from the 4 operators is fantastic. So we want to build or demonstrate our networks and see how we can then engage, whether that's neutral host or roaming or other types of opportunities. And then these operational entities, the design components, maintenance components, OSS, BSS, how do we build that into a so-called BENCOM or cooperative entity that can run or create this private network? And again, roaming and neutral host. We're going to be building, we have already built, but we'll be building more real networks. So how can we engage with other service providers? So that's my 10 minutes. Thank you for your attention. We're very enthusiastic about 5G new thinking. So we're more than pleased to engage with anyone from the technology or different communities on what we are trying to do and share our progress as we go.
Thank you, Bob. There's been a lot of very informative content already this morning. We are running a little bit behind the schedule, but we're going to have a 5-minute break now. So if we could all get back into the room at 11:26, maybe. Our presenter is Daniel Heary, the founder of Cybermore. See you very shortly.
The second case study, talking about the practical challenges of delivering 5G. Over to you, Daniel.
Okay, thanks, Graham. Welcome, everyone. Good morning. My name is Daniel Heary. I'm from Cybermore, and today I'm speaking to you from the beautiful North Pennines over my shoulder. We've been working in this area in the north of England for the past 20 years, looking at both innovative use cases, but innovative ways of getting really good connectivity out to some of the remote farms and villages that you can see behind me. So our 5G journey started about 3 years ago when we went to one of the briefing events that DCMS had set up around the 5G testbed and trials program. And we recognized that 5G could be a real positive to get good quality broadband out to some of these places which just couldn't get a good service from BT or any of the existing mobile network operators. So we've been involved in a couple of projects, initially the 5Grit project, and then more recently the Mobile Access North Yorkshire project. So both of those really interesting in terms of how you work with communities, but also how you get that connectivity out there and get it working. I'm going to share my screen now and put some slides up. So what we have is, I suppose, a number of themes, and many of them pick up on what Bob was saying in his earlier presentation. So a key part of the project is how do we foster this collaboration between communities, private sector, and also the public sector, who are so important to work in these areas. Second one, it's all about making it citizen focused. So how do we actually develop the use cases and the sort of tools and technologies which will meet the requirements of people who are living in those communities? And how do we use technology which is most relevant to those people? So it's a case of technology which fits in with the local environment, which is appropriate, which works with existing technologies that they're used to using. And one of the big challenges I think I've seen with this is we have with telecoms companies, it's all about scale. It's all about how do we make this really big so we can reduce our cost bases. So how do we get this sort of very high level business plans, big companies, very centralized rollout plans, and then how do we merge that with the sort of bottom up approach where you've got people in communities, they don't really care about the business plan of a big mobile operator, they just want a reliable 4G service or any sort of service that will work so they can make phone calls, use mobile data across their homes, around their farms and in their businesses. But that's actually really difficult to generate. that mixture of the bottom up and the top down, and we spend a lot of time on that. And then I suppose the other element of that is, how do we create the business models which represent what those people need? It represents the value that it makes to those farmers who need that good connectivity, but it also reflects value for the operators who are trying to build these networks, who are aiming to do that. And then I suppose this final point here, we couldn't do it without the generous support of DCMS and the 5G testbed and trials program, which has supported both the projects that I'm talking about here. So if I can just focus on the mobile access for North Yorkshire project. North Yorkshire, huge areas across the Yorkshire Dales and North Yorkshire National Park don't have any mobile connectivity at all, and that's a real problem for the farmers there, for the tourist venues. So what we're doing is looking at some of the key themes that came out of the earlier 5GRIP project that we did. So around things like well-being, mental health, which has been so important, you know, even more so since COVID lockdowns came into place. How do we actually try and alleviate some of those issues? But then tourism, we've got Forbidden Corner, this location here on the top right hand view screen. This is a huge tourist venue, get about 130,000 visitors a year, but they just don't have any sort of decent mobile connectivity across the whole site, which is a huge issue for when visitors arrive and they want to meet up with friends who are arriving on the same day but from different places. They just physically can't make a phone call or send a text to say, yeah, we're here now, let's meet up in the cafe. But also for the people who are running this site, it goes over several acres. They can't use mobiles to keep in touch with each other. So from a health and safety point of view, it's critical. And now, as we see all this stuff with COVID, you know, it's all about, you've got to book ahead, you've got to be really on your game with health and safety. Really important to get all these things sorted out. So connectivity is really important there. And then we see emergency services network is going to be really important too, and the mission critical layer which will be available there. So we're really wanting to trial this out. And while we know that we're not going to be able to work with the police, we are working closely with the Swaledale Mountain Rescue Team, who are typically operating in these sorts of conditions. They need good connectivity in the places that the big mobile operators just aren't going to at the moment. And then you'll have all seen the bad floods that happened in York last year. Really big problem there. How can we use environmental monitoring sensors on the network to actually flag those earlier on to safeguard property and lives? But out of all these things, what tends to come out loudest from communities is they want a better mobile signal, and they, you know, in places where they can't get a decent fibre connection or it's just not cost effective, they want better home broadband speeds as well. And Quickline, one of the country's largest wireless internet service providers, are a key partner on this. They're the lead partner. And so this is really their interest. How can you actually use the 5G network to deliver good fixed wireless, but also offer that mobile element as well? And this is some of the mapping that we've already done on the network. You've probably heard of Swaledale in the North Yorkshire Dales. And when we've gone out and done mapping with a company that have done drive-through surveys, you can see at this end of the Dale, pretty good mobile connectivity from multiple operators on 4G. But then as you get higher up, it starts to get a bit more patchy. And then particularly at these ends of the valley, it's really difficult. So this is where we see locally delivered network solutions, working with communities, leveraging the lower cost of deploying 5G and small cells could actually make a really big difference to these communities, and also the use cases that work off that. So just looking at the key learning points that we've picked up on both the 5GRIT project and the MANY project. I think there's a sort of tension between, on the one hand, the use cases and then the technology. And I like to say that the use cases can really help win minds with the project. So last time on 5GRIT, we were talking to a parish council meeting, explaining the benefits of 5GRIT. And I've got to say, it was a pretty hard gig. There was quite a lot of opposition. People were scared about what they'd read on Facebook. And we got to a point where one of the farmers on the parish council was supportive of it. Someone said to him, so what does this 5G use case around tracking livestock and monitoring livestock, is that any use to you? And he said, yeah, I lost about 7,000, 8,000 pounds worth of sheep last year. So this could be a really big help to me if this was actually be deployed. And at the end of that, everyone was really for the project, because they just saw there's a practical challenge here, sheep being stolen. This is offering a practical solution. Let's do it. So it's how we actually come up with the technology that wins those, the solutions that win those hearts. But what DCMS want to see, and what a lot of the funders want to see, is the innovative use of technology. And it's about how you bring both of those things together into a package. Because what we found is a lot of the technology at this stage, it's quite early, it's quite new, it's quite innovative. It hasn't been field tested. It certainly hasn't been field tested in places like this, where you get 100-mile-an-hour winds, really low temperatures. So it's really important to actually try that out and make sure that it works. But I suppose the other things here are making sure that all the stakeholders are involved and they're enthusiastic, because quite often these projects need more than a large constellation of different actors who can help out. That bit of community consultation and communications is really, really important, and it often gets overlooked with these types of projects. People think it's going to be welcomed with open arms. Well, people tend to be a bit concerned, a bit worried, and it's really important just to get that message across about how it's going to benefit them. But we see, certainly going forward with the MANY project, spectrum availability, which is a bit of a game changer, thanks to Ofcom, but also the potential price reductions through this open sourcing of 5G equipment and back office. But I suppose the key thing, if you only take one thing from what I'm saying here today, is to keep your 5G projects really focused on people who are living and working in rural areas, and how 5G is going to meet their requirements. Don't go off on a sort of technology flight of fancy, because if you really want it to work and have resonance and make it give it the sticking power, it's got to have that. It's got to meet the requirements of those communities that you're working with. There's my contact details, but around this afternoon if people want to do a one-to-one and find out more about it. Thanks very much.
Many thanks, Daniel. We're now moving to another region of the UK, and David's going to take us through our third use case, which is looking at 5G and its opportunity in the healthcare within rural areas.
Thank you very much, Graham. You see my slides okay?
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. So thank you for this opportunity to talk about 5G, connected health, and rural Northern Ireland. As Graham said, I'm the Centre Director for the Northern Ireland Connected Health Innovations, having previously spent 10 years in wireless vital signs medical device development. What I'm going to look at is briefly touch on what the general trends in healthcare are, as well as looking at how COVID-19 has accelerated some of these. Some of the 5G benefits that can be derived for the healthcare sector, and then look at some specific rural healthcare case studies where 5G has the potential to make a significant impact. So we look briefly at some of the stats, which you probably be familiar with many of them. One is increasing life expectancy. If you look at this data on the screen now, someone who was 65 in 2014 has typically, approximately 20 years more of life left. The important thing to notice is probably about 10 of those years will be in good health, and 10 of those years will be in not good health. And really the drive is to increase the proportion of life expectancy in good health through management, through prevention, through timely interventions from a medical point of view, and really to drive some of the cost savings as well as the increased standard of life. We are seeing that as people age, the costs are the number of people that require informal care grow exponentially. So you'll see, the sharp rises from sort of that 65 age range up to 85-year-olds requiring, a high percentage of them requiring informal care and medical care there as well. I'm going to look at some of the general sort of trends from a UK point of view, where we'll have our percentage of the population which is over 65 is continually increasing. By 2044, we'll be approaching 25% of the population will be 65 years and over. And if you look at some of the figures from the NHS around spend based on age, approximately 5 times the cost spent on a patient who's 85 years old than a 30. And although the NHS budget continues to grow and continues to need to grow, the demand is always going to outstrip the supply, which is where technology and connectivity. That being said, there is a push from the consumer side for self-care and technology and healthcare. People are taking more ownership of their own healthcare, be that watches that'll measure your blood pressure or devices that'll measure your ECG, to medications management, even ultrasound devices, and getting into prediction or probabilities of certain illnesses based on DNA testing. So there's a lot of technology out there, and people are sort of increasingly taking more responsibility for their own healthcare. From a Northern Ireland point of view, we have a population of about 1.87 million, and about 37% of those live in rural areas. We do have an integrated health and social care organisation split across 5 trusts, but you'll see a considerable proportion of the Northern Ireland population live in a rural setting. And there are a number of key health factors that sort of are more prominent in rural communities in Northern Ireland. It is the increasing age, and we saw something like 39% of pensioners in Northern Ireland live in rural communities. We have socioeconomic issues, so we have there's a strong link between deprivation and poor health. Poverty is an important risk factor for illness and premature death, and sort of rural deprivation is often hidden and dispersed within areas of apparent rural affluence. 48% of those living in isolated rural areas are described as living in fuel poverty in Northern Ireland. And often people in rural settings are not aware or do not avail of financial assistance to which they're entitled to. We have issues around the use of the limited health resources available. There's a desire for people to stay in close proximity to their homes, and this puts an additional strain on healthcare services in their community. Exclusion and isolation. Rural dwellers are more likely to suffer high levels of loneliness and social exclusion than their urban counterparts. On the mental health side, people in rural areas tend to come from a culture of self-sufficiency, and there is a reluctance to seek outside help, particularly in relation to mental health issues. There are social factors around fear about confidentiality in small communities, which prevents people from making use of those services. And there is, unfortunately, increasing incidence of depression, stress, and suicide across Northern with farmers being one particular occupation consistently considered to be a high risk group. But really any of those who are living in situations of isolation, single worker situations, and lack of knowledge about the services that avail of them. We also have to consider the carers themselves, and that living in a rural community can have an adverse impact on the carers. There's a recent survey, 57% of carers living in remote areas suffered from some form of social exclusion themselves, and 77% were worrying about their financial situation. That very briefly gives you some of the issues. We then look at some of the benefits that 5G can bring into this setting, and it's around the benefits of lower latency, faster transmission of larger amounts of data, the reliability of the 5G connection, particularly in extreme conditions, and really the flexibility around 5G for a range of devices, both low and high data rates. So very briefly, just to give you an overview of where some of the following case studies come from. Northern Ireland Connected Health Innovation Centre was formed in 2013 to create business-led research focused on the connected health market. The competence centres provide economic growth by bringing together universities, research institutes, and innovative businesses to carry out strategic collaborative research in areas with direct industry focus. So in SHEIC, our objectives include delivering impact through transforming healthcare, improving patient outcomes, facilitating health and ageing. Our research domains include community-based healthcare and supported ageing. And we have a range of companies from across Northern Ireland and sometimes beyond who are interested in this sector. If you look at someone's typical healthcare journey as they go through life, you'll go from a stage of good health, where there may be some active ill health prevention, people wanting to live independently, and eventually there'll be some need to access healthcare. So there are lots of issues around getting that access to healthcare and having it delivered in rural settings. There's the treatment involved, and again, if traveling is required for that. And there are quite a few healthcare conditions will then require long-term monitoring and repeat visits to manage those conditions. Often and increasingly, it's not just a single long-term condition. We have people suffering from 3, 4, 5 is quite common. And the associated mental health aspects of that as well. One project we've been working on is really around aging in place. And this is really to allow people to remain in their own homes for longer in an independent way. Currently, dementia affects approximately 19,000 people in Northern Ireland and is predicted to rise to 60,000 people by 2051. And this sort of system would provide accurate and timely information through a multitude of sensors in the home, back to their circle of care, or potentially in a residential home setting, to allow earlier intervention and routine care or observation. The solution that was developed through SHEIC and a couple of partner companies involved a smart home in a box. So it was a solution which could arrive at the home, provide an easy method to deploy a number of sensors, including a thermal sensor, door contact sensors, sound pressure level, and feed that information back to a central monitoring and a dashboard to boost out from that as well, to really report if normal activities of daily living are happening, if there's anything strange or unusual, and provide that reassurance to say to the circle of care that things are okay. There's specific algorithms were built into this around fall detection, that being a potential big issue, again, just to get that intervention in a Another project around increasing access to diagnostics in the community. The goal was to develop innovative technologies capable of accurately diagnosing a set of 13 medical conditions and continuously monitoring 5 vital signs independent of a healthcare professional. The solution, this was part of a global competition, but the solution was based around a smartphone which had a symptom checker used to collect symptoms, and then that would direct the user to run a number of tests and interface with those tests to give an accurate diagnosis of those conditions. And this particular solution achieved joint 3rd place from an initial global entry of 360 teams. Really kickstarted a number of other projects looking at advanced community-based diagnostics. Another sort of application around accessibility, a little bit on sheet, but in the Northern Ireland area, is really around the Northern Ireland Ambulance Service, where they're keen to give all first responders access to the patient's previous medical records, so they have a key summary of the information that will inform the patient's treatment and pathways whenever an ambulance is deployed. There are other objectives around finding timely statistics and clinical audit data, and informing the journey of the patient as they're taken from that first responder situation into care as needed. Also around access, we see an increasing importance of pharmacies. Generally, pharmacies are a lot more prevalent than general practitioners, and we see sort of key aspects of the increase of sort of services that pharmacy will deliver. Often they're the first point of contact with someone who has a medical concern, and they have a real role, an increasing role in helping patients to select digital tools to help them manage their condition. They also look at polypharmacy if people are on multiple conditions and the treatment and medication of those, and may also be the first port of call around behavioural issues, addressing mental health issues for patients. So we see some of the companies that we work with really being key technology adopters in the pharmacy area to grow their delivery. If we take a couple of specific medical conditions, one that we've looked at is around heart failure. Chronic heart failure affects 900,000 people in the UK, consumes almost 2% of the NHS budget. And really what we find with heart failure is that there are very high readmission rates. Someone may come in the hospital, have some surgery, some treatment done, and then they're discharged. But in over 25% of cases, they have to be readmitted to hospital. And often this is because on the discharge, there hasn't actually been changes to lifestyle, or the medication hasn't been sort of titrated correctly. So this is a diagnostic system which was developed to allow the patient to more actively diagnose their conditions, looking at a blood biomarker and vital signs, reporting those back periodically back to the care team, really allow the person to go home sooner, but be actively managed in that critical period, that 30, 90 days after the discharge from hospital. And really the focus is from the user point of view is to allow these measures to be taken with minimal training. Related in the cardiac area, we have a company, IntelliSense, involved in Chic, and they focus on the heart arrhythmia monitoring. Again, allowing people who may have an arrhythmia, a racing heart that comes and goes, that the normal care pathway would typically involve multiple repeat visits to their GP and to cardiac consultants, and may or may not detect the atrial fibrillation because it is such an episodic condition. Whereas this sort of continuous monitoring technology can be put on the patient. They can wear it for anything 2 to 30 days, providing full beat by beat analysis of to a clinician and allow a lot earlier diagnosis and intervention. Another particular disease area we've looked at is around diabetic foot disease, where the challenge is that due to diabetes, there's a limb lost every 30 seconds globally. And this is because something like a diabetic an ulcer has developed and ultimately is not treatable and requiring the amputation. But the science goes that with good self-care, diabetic foot disease can nearly in all cases be avoided. So this was a system to allow the user to monitor their own feet using a thermal camera and a system behind that to look at the images of feet and give indications of areas of concern that may need better self-management, and thereby reduce the need for amputations and that sort of life-changing events that they are. A few other projects just to touch on. One of these, we have a company called Cradle. And really, this is a system. Set-top box goes on the elderly person's television. They're supplied with a very simple remote, and through the system on the TV, it's really to allow them to live independently on their own. There are sort of video calling capabilities in the system to try and reduce that social isolation that very often elder people feel. And a care system company can use data from that to give an indication of, again, normal activities and any changes to those normal activities. So for the family, it gives them a peace of mind and knowing they can call at any time. And for care provision companies, provides a scalable, cost-effective solution. And finally, the specific elements is this issue of social prescribing, which in some ways is preventative healthcare. We have a company, Elemental, we have a system based around social prescribing, which is really a growing movement that connects people with a range of non-clinical programs, services and events in the local community, like walking groups, mental health counselling, debt management, healthy cooking, gardening, those sorts of things, and seeks to address people's needs across a range of areas such as physical activity, diet, nutrition, mental health. And I say it's really much a preventative element. It's increasingly important, but it's sort of a formal way that they're connecting people in with their local community and allowing them to derive those benefits from it. Look very briefly at how COVID-19 has affected healthcare and continues to affect healthcare. I think these are quite telling statistics here. In 2019, the end of last year, NHS Digital reported that just 15% of primary care appointments were taking place by phone or online. By 2020, April 2020, it was 49%, and by May, 90% online. So really the pandemic has forced doctors and medical professionals to master these remote consultations overnight. And you know, this transition is opening up long-term opportunities for basic primary care in the form of limited healthcare professionals locally, remotely supported by doctors and other specialists as needed. And this is really something that you know, rural communities can see great benefit from embracing these hybrid models and leveraging that remote consultation. What I haven't really touched on, I'll just mention it in closing here, is the enablement of artificial intelligence. And really, with some of these solutions, we're using an AI and machine learning approach, but the larger amounts of data available through a 5G connectivity is really going to accelerate the predictive analytics, prescriptive analytics that AI can then use, supporting that, expand telemedicine, filling the widening gaps in healthcare coverage, and that's sort of increasing that real-time remote monitoring. As you can see, I've given you a bit of flavour here. Healthcare is changing fast, and this is opening up many opportunities for the improvement of services in rural communities through 5G connectivity. Thank you very much. I'll pass back to Graham.
Okay, many thanks, David. We'll move quickly on to our last use case. And Ben is going to take us through a different use case, this time around transport.
Hello, everybody. Just sharing my screen, 1 second. I'm hoping you can all see the introduction slide smoothly. So, thank you to all the speakers before. I will try and keep this brief to recover some of the time. I think picking up on much of the sentiment, in particular, Daniel's push there to focus on consumers and business models and keeping it sort of consumer centric. And I think right through each of the pitches, it's key that the business centric piece, how does this stuff make money? What can we do with it? So the target here is just to quickly show you one of the consortiums that Appy Way are leading the transport use case for. The whole project is actually led by Cisco and a number of the local authorities you see pictured here. But we're really pleased as part of a wider 5G play across the Ebbw Vale region in Wales to lead on the transport use case. So just a couple of slides here to show you what we're doing, the opportunity for users and some of the benefits that we're looking to unlock with the functionality. So very briefly, and I think we're all familiar with this, I won't spend too long here, but they've all been touched on. A key theme to our project is to obviously use the new connectivity that the renewed focus in the rural use case brings. Some of the latencies and data exchanges that we can now improve upon using 5G in particular, and that includes right through to connected car technology to deliver real-time availability of parking and things like that, which I'll come on to. But also really the key theme for us as a business, but also in this project, is about access to education, employment and healthcare. And they're all themes that people have recognised in this session as very important. So a quick look at our test area. We're looking up in the Ebbw Vale here. As you see, for those who aren't familiar, directly north of Cardiff and Newport. It's a huge feeder area from Bristol as well. And some of our dissemination, some of our exploitation includes the opportunity of working with Bristol and into Gloucestershire, Herefordshire, and across a number of other counties. But really, this is the territory that we're looking to link up with connectivity, and then look at how new transport modes and the application of technology to improve on those transport modes can help unlock choice for residents and businesses here. That's the aim of the game. So there are 4 themes in the transport use case. As I mentioned, the real-time piece, and this is really something we see as a driver behavior to help the uptake of new modes. And traditionally, a lot of, for example, ride sharing, which I'll come on to, has depended upon goodwill of the driver. And you might catch a small percentage of the local driving fleet, if you will, to take time out of their day and provide lifts and ride sharing to other people. There's never really been much incentive. You might earn a very small amount of money. It can come with a series of implications if you start charging for that. It's problematic, and these services traditionally haven't enjoyed huge uptake. So we formed a couple of different partnerships, but the first one is around the sensing of parking availability. How do we find available parking bays across the region? There's both off-street car parks at the park and ride facilities, but also on street in some of the major townships that people are looking to get to. But then what we do is actually take that data right through to the consumer application. So we've got a partnership now with Cardiff University on the sensing side of this project, and that's using rural connected cameras to pick up available parking spots and push that out to whoever may be interested in incorporating that in a service. It includes our own IoT sensors to sense the presence of vehicles in every single bay. And that's something that we'll be launching very quickly in the project to collect data and understand the movement of vehicles and people in this region. We look at asset utilization by sensing up rural buses, local authority vehicles. We can start to use them as sort of data collection units. And again, 5G unlocks super low latency of that data. And there's a range of applications for other sensing vehicle data that we can use in our own business as usual. There's the bus stop connectivity, and we shouldn't forget that these can be quite remote. They can be very isolated. waiting times for buses isn't always clear, but there's also social factors, keeping people safe at those areas. We might think as well about, vulnerable people, and really I'm thinking about the young and the elderly, those staying in employment a lot longer, but who maybe can no longer rely on private vehicle ownership for access. But also younger people, getting a job at 16 shouldn't mean you must own a car in rural Wales to access jobs. So how do these transport modes support that? And indeed younger than that also. And then we've got the new transport services, as I mentioned. So just showing you a brief storyboard here. But roughly how we see this working is Appy Way will lead the development of real-time availability across the development area, the physical land, both on and off street parking. We will provide that information as an API to our partners LiftShare, who are very, very sophisticated in the way that they build community and attract drivers to a LiftShare ride-sharing platform. And then there'll be various campaigns in the local region through local businesses. This sort of service could be incorporated within a human resources portal with some benefits internally at the company, but could also be used as a rollout with the local authorities. And key now is the hook of available parking, with which we'll be looking to explore the opportunity to book and reserve parking. And we can then offer discounted parking to people who are using this service. That could be on the high street in Cardiff one day. That could be a park and ride with the availability of the next inbound bus incorporated. So you can book your parking bay, be there in plenty of time for the connection, and enjoy your onward journey. And then there's also the link with rail that isn't inside this project, but we're also looking more nationally. When you book your rail ticket, book your parking, and how do you build these kind of incentives and access into the portal as well. So there's a lot right through to the user journey here encompassed here, but it starts with sensing what is the current state of parking and availability. How do we get that data in near real time as quickly as possible into the hands of drivers? And then how do we build community around those drivers that ensures they're willing to participate in the service, but also the benefits realization that they can enjoy. So two sides here. The obvious one for the environment, which is a key focus, is reducing congestion and emissions into the town centres, onto the high streets. These are often hugely congested on the traditional sort of 9 to 5ers driving to and from work. So how do we get vehicle occupancy improved? How do we reward that with reserve parking? And how do we also create, choice for, as I mentioned, those vulnerable user groups that we recognise needing access in this territory? The future case as well, once we've got digital parking bays, we can look at their electrification, look at utilisation of how we turn an EV bay serving sort of 3, 4, 5 cars over a 24-hour period, whereas today sort of average is less than 1 because of the time to charge, but also the user habits around the EV charge point. If you've driven to work, you might be doing an 8-hour shift. You're unlikely to move your vehicle inside the 8-hour shift. So therefore, you could block an EV bay for the whole shift. So again, how do we build community around these use cases? For us, it starts with data quality and data fast into the hands of consumers. And as I mentioned, this sort of thriving rural centres. So we're looking ultimately to reduce the dependency on private car ownership, which both economically and practically can be a huge barrier to the elements that we see people sort of need. I mentioned utilisation already. That includes the car and parking bays, but also things like buses as data centres, local authority vehicles as data centres. And getting the whole region, though this is the sort of first use case of many, getting the whole region digitised, people in local authorities equipped with their own APIs and SDKs to drive new services, and then also building the business around that to help take these forward. There's going to be some social elements to both. There's definitely a sense of community. There's definitely a sense of reward that comes with these types of services. But for us, as I mentioned, it's all about access. And key is parking. Many people miss this. Parking is already a tried and tested business model. It's over 100 years old. People are in the habit of paying for access by parking. And we think we can offer a much, much better consumer service inside that business model, make it more premium, make it more socially responsible and benefit the environment. And then inside that, open up a number of other business cases which ultimately drive more revenue. Now that's like crown jewels to us. There's a number of case studies where we've done this successfully with on-street parking. We've got a great case study in the town of Harrogate up in the north of England where we've been operational for 2 years. this project takes all of our parking learning, plus all of the knowledge in the consortium for the rural community, and looks to create, as I mentioned, better access to education, health, and jobs. So thank you very much. I've rattled through my slides more briefly to catch some time back. If anyone's got any questions, my email address is here, and do feel free to reach out. I look forward to talking to you, and good luck to everybody in all their projects. Thank you.
Many thanks, Ben. That's the end of the case studies. People have been typing questions in the Q&A, and I'd like to now welcome Rosalind Singleton, who's the chair of the UK Advisory Board, to facilitate the Q&A session.
Thanks, Graham. So good morning, everyone. I will probably get through this fairly quickly because I know everybody would probably like to get as close to being on time for the rest of the day as they can. So we've had a few questions come in over the question and answer box, obviously. And I think, you know, there's some great questions that have come up there. One of the ones I thought was most interesting. So Alex Reed asked about how we as a 5G technical community, which I sort of consider myself part of, engage with rural business owners. And I think actually that's true across actually any industry. As telecoms people, we tend to talk telecoms and use acronyms and words and assumptions of knowledge that aren't necessarily there. So I suppose my question to the panelists that are online today is, how do you engage with your community and make sure you are as clear as you can be about what you're doing, how you talk to them and how you translate it? Because again, we're going to, in all the industries Peter spoke about, we're going to need to be able to communicate, right, between the two. So perhaps start with Daniel, who's obviously had some strong opinions on that.
Yeah, thanks. So a lot of it is about trust, and we try and work with organizations and individuals who are already active in those communities, who have got a knowledge about the potential that the technology can deliver, but also what the challenges are in that community. And quite a nice story came about on the many projects we're doing now, where a parish council that we were aiming to work with had a meeting, and there were some people there who were quite vociferous anti-5G campaigners, but also someone had turned up who was from the community, who was an expert in telecoms. We didn't know anything about him, but he gave a really compelling account of all the issues around 5G. He covered off all the safety concerns, and he explained to them in a way that they could understand. But because he was seen as being neutral and wasn't anything to do with our project, that gave a huge amount of value and built a huge amount of trust. So it really comes back to that idea of trust and working with people who know the area, know the challenges, and can be seen as being honest brokers.
Great, thank you. I mean, David, from your perspective, obviously a slightly different viewpoint. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is key to have you know, to come beside the potential customers and users and really to understand those. I think, you know, anyone who's not from a technology background, if you try and sell technology, you're going down the wrong path. It's around maybe even selling isn't the right word, but conveying a solution. It's providing and understanding what the benefits can be, and the healthcare, you know, the benefits in whatever sector. I think in healthcare it's particularly difficult because there's so much institutionalized in healthcare, but it is a sector which is thankfully, I sort of say, starting to move, and it was part of a bigger digitization thing, process. I think there are many opportunities in 5G, but it's really around, you know, having a good understanding of the problem and being able to address the problem through the technology as opposed to coming with a technology that might be used. Okay,
that's great. Thank you. If I can just move on to a slightly different question for Bob and Peter, which is actually what level of participation are we seeing from the mobile network operators in the work that you guys have been doing? And is there any interaction with the single rural network? So the work that DCMS and Ofcom are doing to try and ensure that we have more consistent mobile coverage from all the operators across the rural areas. Perhaps Bob, you first maybe, or Peter. Peter, you're off mute already. I don't mind, either one.
Either way. In terms of the shared rural network, yeah, I'm not that too close to the SRN team at DCMS, but I know that they're deeply engaged with the 4 MNOs and also some of the local authorities on how best they can improve coverage. The one area that I am aware of is some of the work that Vodafone has been doing, only because they've been very public over the last 2 or 3 months that they've now built 2 or 3 sites in remote rural areas, I think a couple of sites specifically in Wales as part of the SRN program. I am also aware, because of another project that, an early days project that I'm engaged with along with a bunch of other people, which is with the Welsh Government, where they are looking at the potential for engagement with mobile operators, with industry, on addressing the rural challenge. And there's some specifics that are ongoing. There's nothing concrete there as such at this point in time, but it's certainly something where industry is already stepping up and engaging with the regional government itself to actually look at the challenges there and how best we can address them.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Hi. I mean, I think that you know, the SRN, you know, first. I mean, SRN is a 4G rollout, so it's a kind of intervention or support that will drive the 4G, you know, connectivity. So in some ways that's you know, that's not 5G, but it's very consistent with what 5G in rural is all about. Because again, if we look at what people in rural areas, particularly disconnected rural areas, what they need is connectivity. So in many ways, whether that comes via a fiber or it's a new fixed wireless access or it is a 5G mobile network or even a good 4G network, I don't think communities are really concerned. They would just like to have that, that great connectivity. Of course, as we look forward and we see all the wonderful opportunities of driverless cars and so on, well, we need 5G there. Otherwise, you'll get out the city and you need to grab the wheel again, which maybe is a good idea, of course. So I see that the type of engagement that, you know, that we have found is very important over many years is just make sure we set expectations. Because, I mean, we're for real, just like all the other projects are for real. We are installing, you know, demonstrating networks. We're not coming up with a magic bullet solution. We're not suggesting that, you know, it's easy and it just wasn't done before. It's actually very, very difficult. It's very challenging. It's very expensive. And that's why it's not been possible to, you know, to roll out. So with different business models, different approach, different style, and sharing is the big word. We've got access to shared spectrum now. You know, shared facilities is part of what SRN is all about, and sharing via neutral hosting and other mechanisms. We are speaking to all of the MNOs. We've got various levels of dialogue, and we want to demonstrate what we are able to deploy with our kind of private community networks, and then see where the interface point is, see where the point of connection is, such that if we do create something, then it could perhaps be integrated as part of a wider network. So I think the dialogue is all very good, and I think everyone's pushing in the right direction now in the UK. We all see that we need a kind of joined up solution with lots of stakeholders.
Yeah.
Ross, if I may just add to what Bob was saying there, I'm aware of one of the mobile operators is actually trying out 3 different technology approaches. One of which is something called a mobile private network, where basically they extend their current commercial network through a dedicated connection into an area, and that area could be a building, it could be a wider area, but effectively it creates a pseudo private network for use within a community or within a set of buildings and so on. So there are 2 or 3 commercial solution providers out there at the moment that have got that type of technology. But it's now for the operators to actually look at how they can deploy that while maintaining all the security and all the other things that they need to do to ensure their networks stay up day to day.
Yeah, because of course, you know, actually being available is as important as working right in the first place and high speed and those sorts of things. So I've got a question for Ian on the sort of government perspective, I suppose. So as far as you know, 5G in rural areas goes, and the, you know, the availability of the new white space, which the minister announced, and, you know, the rollout of 700 that goes along with that. Does DCMS have any particular thoughts on whether it should be 5G specifically, or whether it should be 4G and 5G, or actually about, you know, how it should be used at all, really, given that it'll be fairly narrow band?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of conversations around what this spectrum should be used for, which G it's applied to, and how to do it. I think what we've learned through the programme is we need to be a bit agnostic around technology and understand what the business problems are we're trying to solve. So having 5G for doing Internet of Things, small data, where low latency is not really that relevant, probably doesn't make sense. But you can have a lot more connected devices. The fact that 700 megs being cleared means that you can get more coverage much easier into those places. So it all forms part of the ecosystem where you need the operators to, if they're going to deploy their networks in the rural areas with a shared rural network, they can use 700 meg, they can have some taller towers if people allow them to have taller towers, and then they can get coverage much easier and much cheaper. So then it becomes, what's the business problem you're trying to solve, to then say, what level of connectivity do I need to have? And what we've seen from one of our other trials is that people think that, oh, just having a bit of rural connectivity is all right, something's better than nothing. If you then overlay that with healthcare, for example, if you're using healthcare as a use case in a rural environment, you have to have good, reliable connectivity and coverage. Otherwise, you can't rely on that as a service. So the whole thing has to work together.
That's great, thank you. Ben, from your perspective, obviously, you know, I assume your app relies on constant connection, does it?
Yeah, I mean, the Appy Parking app, the original, certainly does. But we can also do it offline through sort of desktop tools when we're integrated with employers.
Okay, but really, for it to work in any of the ways you've described, you'd need to be constantly online.
Yeah, the key is the sensing in the region. So we're looking at putting cameras onto, for example, a bus. As the bus goes down the high street, it will pick up available parking and send that to our back end. The moment that information is seconds old in the parking use case, it's arguably out of date and no longer valuable. So it's about how do we access the largest fleet we can and bring that signal capture latency down as tight as we can. And at the moment, our trial is something like sort of 18 seconds. That's no good if you're a driver in a queue of traffic competing. So that's what the whole study looks at, is signal latency with this capability. And imagery as well. Here is an available space. Here's a picture of it. And that helps, you know, different drivers of different groups really sort of enjoy a much more comprehensive user journey.
That's great, thank you. So I'm going to draw it to a close now and give you all the rest of your time back for your meeting mojos and those sorts of things. As I've been told, 12:25, and you know, we're already a little bit over. So I'm going to hand back to Ivona now, I assume, who will be dealing with everything else.
On mute, Ivona.
Would you like to say a few words to summarise the session today?
Yeah. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and obviously thank all the speakers, and hope you found the event very useful. Obviously, Peter and Adrian discussed the huge opportunity, I think of 1.2 trillion of 5G, and how pervasive it's going to be in everybody's life. And you know, David gave the use cases, extensive use cases going on in the health sector, so it's going to impact every one of us. Ian mentioned the commitment from the government, sort of 200 million in the rollout, and as you can see, extensive activities going on in all areas of the UK. We touched every region in the UK as we went round, and I think one thing, a takeaway for me, was what Daniel said. You know, it's got to be practical. Understand the practical requirements, understand the challenges on the ground when you're engaging the community, and continue to make it real for the end users. But many thanks to everyone attending and to our speakers. So I think, Ivona, there's some logistics now. think we've lost Ivona.